safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, October 24th, 2023. My name is Emma Vigeland in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jacob Sugarman, on the far-right libertarian candidate in the Argentinian presidential elections, facing a setback in the first round of elections. Good news there. But not good news in Gaza. Another day, more Israeli atrocities. At least 700 Palestinians killed in the last 24 hours. The total is over 5,700 in Gaza, 1.4 million displaced. This also comes as fighting escalates on the Lebanon border. Hamas releases 2 elderly hostages, including 85-year-old Yohevet Leshvitz, a woman who delivered aid to Gaza during her life. The husbands of these women are still captive, unfortunately, but thank God they've been released. Gazans who want to leave say they cannot afford rides to get away from the bombing. Too poor to save their own lives. Back in the U.S., a third Trump lawyer has now pled guilty in Georgia, Jenna Ellis. We'll get to that later in the show. UAW strikes continue to expand. 6,800 Stellantis workers in Michigan joined the strike, and then just this morning, 5,000 workers at GM's largest American plant in Arlington, Texas, will as well. As of right now, and this could change, Tom Emmer leads in the chaotic Republican caucus speaker vote, but some anti-gay hardliners not too happy that he voted in favor of gay marriage. USA Today polling shows Biden and Trump tied, with Trump's lead cut into by RFK Jr. Bobby, why? The Biden impeachment inquiry lets out another fart. The supposed direct payment from China was actually a loan repayment from Biden's brother. Michael Cohen set to testify against Trump in the civil fraud trial today. Bob Menendez pleads not guilty to being a foreign agent for Egypt. A Trump-appointed judge rules in favor of allowing a controversial abortion reversal practice. Oklahoma's Attorney General, a Republican, sues his own state board to stop the country's first publicly funded religious charter school. That's a principled stance by him. And, well, at least on its face. And lastly, the Ontario New Democratic Party caucus has censured and expelled Sarah Jama over her calls for a ceasefire in Gaza. All this and more on today's program. Hello, everybody. It is Newsday Tuesday. Sam is off on jury duty. We will know the full timeline of said jury duty shortly. Sam will keep us updated, but for now, you're stuck with me. You're stuck with me. Hello to Bradley. Hello to Matt. We will be doing a bit of a newsy show today, Newsday Tuesday. But we do have a guest today because I wanted somebody to come on to speak about what's happening in Argentina. But before we get to that, I wanted to start here because we didn't get to this on Monday. Josh Paul is the State Department official who resigned from the Biden administration. Paul has gone public. Over the weekend, he went on PBS, and spoke about his decision to resign in protest over the United States' continued funding of what many have called a genocidal campaign in Gaza, but at the very least, you can unequivocally call them human rights atrocities and war crimes. The United States supposedly has a framework to determine whether or not we should fund offensive military procedures and giving weapons to certain countries. And that process is known as Lehigh vetting, or Leahy vetting. Sorry, I keep saying it wrong, but it's after Patrick Leahy, the senator. And from the State Department's website, I will read here. The term Leahy law refers to two statutory provisions prohibiting the U.S. government from using funds for assistance to units of foreign security forces when there is credible information implicating that unit in the commission of gross violations of human rights. It is named after Patrick Leahy, as I mentioned, and some of those human rights atrocities can include things like sexual abuse of people who are in their captivity, torture, but most notably here, the murder of non-combatants, the murder of civilians. And this is now the policy of what Israel is engaging in Gaza. So this is what Josh Paul had to say about that, specifically about the lack of application and consideration of the Leahy vetting rule that would normally be applied to other instances when we are funding military operations abroad.
Leahy vetting, where units that are identified to be involved in gross violation of human rights are not eligible to receive U.S. weapons. There is a Leahy vetting process for Israel. It has never found an Israeli unit to be guilty of a gross violation of human rights. It's a broken system.
Okay, well, you could argue that isn't that proof that the vetting that State Department does do, you say, of the Israel's defense forces have not found a violation of Leahy? Does that mean that they don't violate Leahy?
Well, they've identified many, but they have not been able to come to a conclusion which requires senior level sign-off within the department.
Just to be clear, are you saying that there have been units inside Israel's defense force that the State Department has been concerned about?
Yes.
Their violations or their actions, you've brought that to senior officials, and over the years, consistently, they have not acted on
that. That is correct.
These questions, of course, were put to Matt Miller, the State Department spokesman, earlier today. Let's take a listen to what he said.
We comply with all applicable statutory requirements and regulatory requirements in our provision of military assistance to Israel, as we do to every other country in the world.
Isn't that what the U.S. pushes, and isn't that the policy?
I think that is right. We have complied with the laws. The problem is that the laws are intentionally vague in some cases. So, for example, they require a determination that something has happened in terms of gross violation of human rights before sanctions, as they were, could be applied. So, yes, absolutely, we are acting within the law. The question is that good enough? And we are certainly not acting within the conventional arms transfer policy.
That is 100% accurate here. Let's let him continue, because we've actually mentioned this before on the show, how in the UK there's a grander tradition of resignation and protest that we have lauded, and that the United States should have more of that kind of culture within our government, and people should be rewarded for this. I hope that Paul, is able to find employment elsewhere, given the fact that this is a incredibly principled stance to do this. He expands a bit on his reasoning here, and then we'll play Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez speaking about the Leahy vetting process, and that's a good news because that's an elected official who's starting to take these considerations into account.
We've seen that for 20 years, the provision of security assistance to Israel, and for longer than that, has not led to peace. And instead, it has used the way it has employed that security is actually led us further from peace. And so I wrote to a number of leaders within the department 2 days after Hamas's attack and said, I recognize that there's going to be a demand signal for arms to Israel. Can't we for once stop and think about if this is actually getting us to where we need to be before we move forward?
And what was the response?
No response.
And how unusual is that?
It's extremely unusual. If you think about other countries in the region, I won't name names, but there are obviously a number where there are troubling human rights records. And the debate over arms sales requests that come from those countries can last within the administration itself for months, sometimes even years.
During your time,
Egypt,
though,
Saudi Arabia.
The United States, for example, I will name names, provided arms to Egypt, widely criticized for its human rights abuses, and to the Saudi, coalition
Yes.
that
Read my
has
mind.
killed many, many civilians in Yemen and accused of violating the laws of war
Yes.
by Human Rights Watch. Why do you not resign after those arms transfers?
Because those were cases where I could make a difference and manage through my work and the work of many others in the department to add some elements to it. So, for example, there is a training program that has been going on now with Saudi pilots to improve their targeting. And in the case of Egypt, of course, we have, Leahy vetting.
Yeah, so he goes on, I guess the clip got cut off there. But he does go on to speak about the different processes that are applied to different nations in that way. And the undertone here is that paired with, by the way, this Huffington Post report about other State Department officials who are preparing to make a formal declaration of concern and dissent via this kind of cable that I'm forgetting the exact name of, but it was developed during the Vietnam War.
Dissent cable, yeah.
The dissent cable, yeah.
I mean,
So that people could say how they felt without under the cloak of anonymity. But this man has gone public. It seems, though, I don't think he would. I mean,
there needs to be more of that because
Yes.
a whole bunch of people signed a cable, a similar cable about Trump's Muslim ban. And-
Right.
Right. So,
Right.
There's only so much that does. Besides, I mean,
him
I
speaking out does a
appreciate it.
lot. Right.
Him speaking out, yes, absolutely, and resigning is that's where it makes a big difference.
Absolutely. And the point there and the undertone is that the reason that this was fast-tracked without any of the normal process of using that Leahy framework is because these are political considerations. And Biden and Blinken essentially said, Israel is our strongest ally, and we are going to back them up in whatever way that we determine is necessary without the normal procedures and guardrails that are supposed to be in place here. And the guardrails are threadbare and horrific as is. I mean, the anchor there asks him specifically about Egypt and Saudi Arabia and the military funding that we provide there. That's the fact that was done while using the Leahy rule here means that we already don't have enough of an institutional kind of break system on the military funding that goes abroad. Yeah, I mean, but at the very least, when you point to that and show that in this instance, even those threadbare processes were not applied, it just underscores how insane this is.
Yeah.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez went on Mehdi Hassan's show on Sunday, and she spoke about this in particular.
I don't see how anyone can look at reputable international organizations confirming the carrying and deployment of white phosphorus by the Israeli government, the Israeli military, and say that there is no question here. In fact, Josh Paul, the State Department official that resigned publicly this week, pointed specifically to this issue, that the Leahy laws, United States Leahy laws, require the United States to assess if a government is committing war crimes or engaged in gross violations of human rights. And that must be considered in any weapons transfer or military aid assistance. And from an individual whose role directly involved the assessment and the deployment of these weapons and consideration of Leahy, he himself is saying that U.S. law is, in his view, being violated. And that must be an absolute consideration, because when we are talking about the role of democracy and fighting for democracy, the whole case for democracy, it lies upon and rests upon civil society, rule of law, and the protection of human and civil rights.
It does. Well, I mean, and she's speaking strategically there as she does on cable news about this kind of stuff. Our foreign policy processes have been so untethered from the democratic will of the people for so many decades now that it's important to remind
the entirety of our nation's history.
Well, I'm being charitable, but I mean, you can even the language of the changing of the Department of War to the Department of Defense,
right,
really just shows you how
well, you said it from the Cold War deterrence to now it's democracy. And it's
yes,
like, oh, for sure, man.
Yeah, right, exactly. There's a lot of obfuscating language to get around the fact that our tax dollars go to this crap and we have zero say over it. And we're doing poll after poll and opposition to the disproportionate, murderous Israeli response is growing. And yet, for some reason, the president, a Democrat who's supposedly on the side of diplomacy and more humanitarian considerations, is sending out memos to the State Department to not use the terms bloodshed and ceasefire. And that story's a week old, but his rhetoric has not updated. So what is Biden
at the UN?
Yeah, right. What is Biden doing at this point? This is a black mark on his legacy, and he would be wise to listen to these people who work for him in the State Department and work for Tony Blinken, that this is not something that I think average people want to be a part of, especially if they're engaged in public service in that way and they want to be a part of the State Department, which in theory should be the most diplomatic and peace forward arm outside of our weapons industry.
Oh, this stuff comes from the top. I mean, it's the exact thing like the Leahy stuff. It's the people, it's the lower level bureaucrats like, yeah, hey, look at Israel doing this stuff. And then the top level people being like, yeah, no, we're not going to move forward on that. Keep researching, though. Good job with that stuff. Keep it just on your desk.
Exactly. All right, guys, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be speaking to Jacob Sugarman about what happened in Argentina over the weekend. We are back, and we are joined now by Jacob Sugarman, lifestyle editor at the Buenos Aires Herald, former managing editor of Truthdig, who wrote a piece in The Nation entitled Argentina's Son of Sam, Presidential Election. Jacob joins us from Buenos Aires right now. Thanks so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
So, Sunday's elections. Over the weekend, we had some lukewarm good news coming out of Argentina, right? The far-right libertarian candidate did not get the necessary votes to win in the first round of the elections, and he had been favored. So this is welcome news. I know that Lula has spoken out against him. Gustavo Petro, the president of Colombia, who is a leftist, has spoken out against him. What makes him so dangerous, and what happened on Sunday?
Right. So I think before we talk about the elections on Sunday, it's helpful just to look back towards August when there was a primary election. And during that election, Milei ended up winning the most votes with just under 30%. So there was a kind of widespread fear that he would be the next president, that he was on a fast track to being elected on Sunday, and if not on Sunday, then in a runoff in November. And what happened was that the kind of center-left coalition, Unión por la Patria, whose candidate was Sergio Massa, ended up winning 37% of the votes, and Milei's vote share didn't really budge. If anything, it went down just a tick from August. So there will be a runoff in November, and I think it is important to really see this as sort of lukewarm news, because it's not guaranteed that Massa is going to prevail. I think Sunday's results certainly increase the odds that he will be Argentina's next president, but I think it's also important to recognize that 30% of the country voted for Milei, and just under 24% of the country voted for another pretty far-right candidate named Patricia Bullrich, who's part of the Juntos por el Cambio coalition. So that's 54% of the country voting for a far-right figure of one kind of strain or another. And we'll see now where those votes, her votes, Bullrich's votes, end up going when it comes to a runoff. To answer your question about what makes Milei so dangerous, he's not part of the Argentine political establishment. That has sort of been his whole kind of appeal to Argentine voters, who have grown increasingly disillusioned over the last decade as the country's economy has stagnated. And his ideas, realistic or not, are completely out there. I'm not even talking about his proposals to sell human organs on the free market. He positions himself as a kind of a radical libertarian. He's identified as an anarcho-capitalist. Awesome. Even if you said he's permanently on one. But he even his sort of more reasonable proposals, if you want to call them that, or at least ideas that are within kind of I'm reluctant to call them within the mainstream, but ideas that potentially he could enact. Doing away with the Argentine central bank, abandoning the peso for the U.S. dollar. Again, I don't know if he has the congressional support to be able to push these kinds of things through. I know that the Chief Justice of the Argentine Supreme Court has said doing so would be unconstitutional. But these are policies that would have a tremendous impact on working people. And poverty is above 40% right now. Inflation stands at 138%. People are struggling to begin with, and this would just sort of obliterate, what little kind of spending power they have, and really do tremendous damage to both the Argentine economy and working class people altogether.
I mean, I almost want to read directly from your piece here, because you have this paragraph that lists some of these. I'm just going to do that because it's absolutely insane. Milei has campaigned on privatizing the country's public education system and many of its state-owned companies. He has vowed to dynamite the Argentine central bank and dollarize the nation's economy over the protestations of economists and former government ministers. He has sworn to roll back abortion rights and sex education, despite identifying as a former, quote, tantric sex instructor. He has advocated loosening gun regulations and at different junctures indicated that it should be legal to sell your organs or your children on the open market. He claims to have cloned his deceased dog and is reported to have communicated with him through a medium. And as of this writing, he is the odds-on favorite to become the country's next president, even as his own supporters disapprove of many of his positions. So the question there is, what is happening in Argentina that a guy like this, a far-right libertarian pseudo-populist figure with those insane views, can be the front runner in the elections in a few weeks?
Right. I mean, I'm not sure that he's the front runner now. The piece was published ahead of the election,
Gotcha,
so I think
sorry.
it's safe to say that Massa has sort of kind of leapfrogged him and is probably the favorite heading into the November runoff. Although again, it's still very much up in the air. The answer to that question is complicated and quite long. But what we've seen is, more than a decade of economic stagnation in the country. The population has increasingly lost faith in its political establishment to kind of improve their material circumstances, which continue to get worse with each passing year and really even month. Even over the past few months, we've seen the value of the peso completely crater. And salaries aren't keeping pace with this inflation, which goes up, month over month. And so along comes this economist who, really wasn't quite an obscure figure, but mostly existed as sort of a media entity before he entered Congress in 2021. And, his ideas feel radical because what he is proposing is a complete break with this Argentine state. I don't think people quite understand necessarily the implications of dollarization, but if you just sort of hear that term, the idea is like, if I can earn a salary in dollars, that will radically improve my standard of living. I think a lot of voters maybe don't totally grasp what that would entail and what the kind of economic repercussions would be of abandoning the sovereign currency. And, again, I've seen these sort of comparisons thrown around between him and Trump and Bolsonaro. It's important to note that his sort of policy proposals are quite distinct in a lot of ways. He is much more of a kind of libertarian than I think those two figures. But, at least rhetorically, there are some similarities. I mean, another part of Milei's appeal is that he will say just the most outlandish things possible. He referred to another economist as a mongoloid, and this drew criticism from the largest autism, I think it was actually a Down syndrome institution in Argentina, organization in Argentina. So, again, I think the idea is not necessarily that his politics align perfectly with those far-right figures, but that, he offers that same kind of libidinal release to say things that people previously didn't feel comfortable saying, hurtful, outrageous, kind of violent things. And that has found traction here, mostly with young men, it should be noted. That sort of is the base of his support. But young people in general are sort of gravitated to him. I think I mentioned a statistic in that piece that something like 62% of his base is 16 to 30 years old. And, a lot of that comes from these kids kind of growing up in an economy that offers very little opportunity, and they just sort of feel like, well, what other, nothing is working, and so why not give this a shot?
Can you speak a bit about how the economy got to that point? My understanding is that previous administrations had taken out an IMF loan, and there has been a lot of kind of restrictions placed on the way that business can be conducted, really, in Argentina, if you don't mind, and from the government's perspective, not actual business. But if you don't mind expanding on that.
Yeah, sure. So the previous administration of Mauricio Macri, who is part of the Juntos por el Cambio coalition, which is sort of the broad center-right party in Argentina, took out a $57 billion loan from the IMF in, I believe it was 2018. And, theoretically, the idea was that this loan was going to be able to pay off all of if not all of Argentina's external debt, to help pay some of that off. Much of that debt was for previous loans from the IMF. And, in practice, what it ended up doing was finance this sort of massive capital flight from the country. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that major corporations and a lot of wealthy citizens were able to sort of buy up dollars, keep them overseas, avoid kind of tax payment. And so what we've seen in the years since is inflation has kept going on up. We have seen poverty rise steadily. And to this day, Argentina kind of remains under the thumb of this international lender. And, I think part of Sergio Massa's, I wouldn't say his appeal, but one of the reasons why he's sort of considered a more of a moderate candidate is that he has sort of pledged to kind of balance Argentina's budgets. That would be kind of a mixture of some austerity measures, although to his credit, he has been quite adamant about his desire to protect public education and public health care. But yeah, I mean, Argentina remains in dire economic straits, and I don't think a figure like Milei could have gained the traction that he did were things not as bad as they are. And whoever wins in November is going to inherit, a country that is in shambles in a lot of ways.
I mean, so Massa, would you describe him as a centrist candidate essentially, and what does that, if you entail, and what are the challenges that presents when you're facing somebody like Milei, who is a wrecker in every sense?
Yeah, I mean, Massa comes from the right wing of the Peronist coalition. It's kind of complicated, but Argentina has many different political parties and then sort of voting blocs that kind of pool together into these different coalitions. Sergio Massa comes from the right of the kind of broad center-left coalition that is known as the Peronists. And his policy proposals are mostly centered around extraction, shale gas, lithium, and kind of balancing out Argentina's, fiscal debt, which will obviously take many years. But he himself is I don't think has made any kind of, I don't want to say that let me back that up a little bit. It's not that he hasn't made certain promises, but I don't think the idea that somehow, like, this is not Lula, this is not even Cristina Fernandez de Kirchner. This is someone who, comes from a more conservative background. And in the kind of lead up to the election, he did make some overtures to workers. He sort of rolled back a sales tax or allowed kind of people who spend within the country to recover some of those funds. He also eliminated an income tax for a number of other workers as sort of a way to kind of appease, working classes and the middle classes ahead of the vote. But austerity, or in some shape or form, is coming one way or another, whether it's sort of this extreme version under Milei or a kind of more moderate, kind of managed plan under Massa.
Well, that's just notable because there have been obviously some resurgent center-left or leftist movements in other countries in Latin America. I mean, I mentioned earlier some of the other leaders who have been in opposition to Milei, like Lula and Petro as well. This feels like a situation where Argentina hasn't caught up to some of the insurgent political movements in neighboring nations. Can you speak a bit about the unique nature of why that is the case, and why this kind of centrist is the representative to face off against this very dangerous figure?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's safe to say that the left is in retreat in Argentina right now. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that their kind of party or coalition was in power during the pandemic and in the years afterwards. So they, what we've seen throughout Latin America and really throughout much of the Western world is that, there's a strong desire to throw out governments that have been kind of ruling during these very difficult economic and social times. And Argentina's center-left coalition has been in power through the pandemic, through a world historic drought that hit the country last year, which is itself a product of climate change. But you really have a kind of confluence of a lot of different world crises at once happening in Argentina. So, yeah, I mean, I think all of that kind of contributes to a strong anti-Peronist sentiment. And what may yet save Massa is that his opposition is just so bonkers and so out there that I think, Argentina can't stomach, electing this guy. We'll see if that's the case. Already Milei has started making overtures to Juntos para el Cambio, which is the kind of more established center-right party. And we'll see if just how strong anti-Peronism is in Argentina. I know that sort of anti-petismo, sort of an anti-workers party sentiment in Brazil nearly carried Bolsonaro to victory in 2022. But yeah, that's sort of, I guess, kind of the panorama of why you don't see kind of a leftist figure emerging in Argentina the way that Boric has in Chile and Gustavo Petro has in Colombia and Lula has returned in Brazil. Some of this is also kind of a product of timing.
Lastly here, before I let you go, you also wrote about how Milei and the vice presidential pick, Victoria Villarruel, I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name, that they...
Villarruel.
Okay, I won't even attempt it. You can just fill in the blank for me, all right? I was concerned about many things in your piece, but one of the things that you wrote about is their kind of revisionism of past atrocities that had been committed during the military regime in the 70s and 80s in Argentina. Can you talk a little bit about that and kind of what that says more broadly about their political ideology?
Right. So Victoria Villarruel, who is the vice presidential candidate of Milei and a member of Congress herself, her own family were military officers within the regime, within the junta, or maybe not part of the junta itself, but part of the military establishment during the dictatorship. And what they have done is there's sort of a broad consensus within the country and abroad that the past dictatorship either killed or disappeared 30,000 people. And within Argentina, there is sort of a kind of denialist movement that maintains that number was actually closer to 8,000 or that the number was invented kind of whole cloth. And what they have spent a kind of a portion of this campaign doing is kind of reifying that notion, or at least lending it credence, that in fact, what Argentina experienced was not state-sponsored terrorism, but a kind of dirty war between two opposing forces. One was the nation's military, and the other was this left-wing guerrilla force that was split up into a bunch of different groups, and that each sort of performs stochastic acts of terror. And obviously, this is dangerous on a number of levels. It's a complete rewriting of history, and for Argentinians, it's sort of opening up a wound that has not healed and likely won't for many decades to come, and sort of kind of challenged consensuses that were already in place. I think since Argentina's return to democracy, it's been established that this is what had happened, and it had sort of reckoned with those crimes, and now we have a presidential contender, and until recently a presidential frontrunner, who was willing to entertain just sort of the most reactionary theories of what actually happened during the dictatorship.
Well, the flattening of power dynamics committed by states versus other groups and rewriting history. I don't know where we're seeing that in the news lately. It just is totally foreign to me, Jacob.
Yes.
I mean,
sound familiar?
a little bit, but really appreciate your time today. People can read the piece in The Nation. It's really extensive and well done if you want to get yourself up to date on what's happening in Argentina. It's called Argentina's Son of Sam presidential election. It's in The Nation. We'll put a link to that piece in the description below or wherever you're listening to this, and at majority.fm. Thank you so much, Jacob. Really appreciate your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Yep, of course. All right, we'll let Jacob go and then quickly run through some of the news stories as we wrap up this Newsday Tuesday. We are monitoring this saga with the Republican speaker vote, and we'll probably end with that so we have the most up-to-date information possible, because it feels like every time we comment on this story there's some new update and then there's no way to give you the most accurate information. So for our podcast audience, that's the courtesy that we'll do for you. But let's talk a bit about this Trump trial in Georgia. So Jenna Ellis pleaded. Which one is it? Matt, you're the English major.
A pled, I think.
Pled?
Yeah. I don't know if we go with pleaded.
Okay.
Pleaded is for pants.
Yeah, that well said. Pled guilty in Fulton County Courthouse today. And she is the third Trump lawyer that has been flipped in this case. And this is why I don't know anything in some ways. I read that for the federal indictment by Jack Smith and thought, wow, this is open and shut. And the way that he made this case makes it very difficult for the defense to poke holes in it. And then I read a little bit of the Fulton County RICO case, and I thought it was more convoluted and less straightforward and a bit broad. But legal experts have said, no, this is actually the one that is going to be the easiest to get some scalps for, so to speak, to put it crudely.
Way, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm sorry. Okay.
Before we get any IMs.
I'm sorry. All right. But not in any real way. No, I don't want the Trump people to come after me.
Right.
Or other people. But so Jenna Ellis did plead guilty in Fulton County court today. She was one of the people on the legal team that was called the Elite Strike Force Team, and now Chesebro or /Cheesebro has pled guilty. We have Sidney Powell, who has
the super normal Sidney Powell.
Yes, pled guilty as well. And as part of her plea agreement, will have to testify in court on these matters, which will be very fun. I'm surprised she didn't go with the insanity defense, but that's a whole different thing.
Sitting right there for her.
I know, right? I mean, I got to question her counsel, but she's avoiding jail time, so I'm sure that that's a win from her lawyer's perspective. But Jenna Ellis is unique in that of those three lawyers who have been flipped in this Trump case, she was the one who requested to give a statement publicly. We have a video of that statement, thanks to super producer Matt Leck, who found this right before we went on air. Here she is crying and also throwing Rudy Giuliani under the bus.
Thank you, Your Honor, for the opportunity to address the court. As an attorney who is also a Christian, I take my responsibilities as a lawyer very seriously, and I endeavor to be a person of sound moral and ethical character in all of my dealings. In the wake of the 2020 presidential election, I believed that challenging the results on behalf of President Trump should be pursued in a just and legal way. I endeavored to represent my client to the best of my ability. I relied on others, including lawyers with many more years of experience than I, to provide me with true and reliable information, especially since my role involved speaking to the media and to legislators in various states. What I did not do, but should have done, Your Honor, was to make sure that the facts the other lawyers alleged to be true were in fact true. In the frenetic pace of attempting to raise challenges to the election in several states, including Georgia, I failed to do my due diligence. I believe in and I value election integrity. If I knew then what I know now, I would have declined to represent Donald Trump in these post-election challenges. I look back on this whole experience with deep remorse. For those failures of mine, Your Honor, I have taken responsibility already before the Colorado bar who censured me, and I now take responsibility before this court and apologize to the people.
I know I got in a Twitter fight with her about something, and now I'm forgetting what it is.
I'll see if I can find it.
It could be a good opportunity for me to do a victory lap, but this is not about me. This is not about me. I mean, look, that is her defense, right? She has less years on probation than someone like Sidney Powell. 5 years probation, $5,000 in restitution, 100 hours of community service. She wrote an apology letter to the citizens of Georgia. She was, yes, one of the members. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh my God, this is perfect. Okay, so that's her talking about Rudy Giuliani there with lawyers with more experience. We got into a Twitter fight about me making fun of Rudy Giuliani. So now they've broken up. They're no longer friends, but I made fun of Rudy Giuliani. I said, the last few months of Rudy Giuliani gets caught allegedly undoing his pants in the Borat movie, hosts an election fraud presser at Four Seasons Total Landscaping, sweats so much his hair dye melts. What else did I say? Click on it. Audibly farts in the hearing. Yes, test positive for COVID-19, an icon. And she goes, imagine being such a worm that you'd actually tweet this. The left's glee over the mayor's COVID diagnosis is evil and despicable.
Can I just say, if I was Giuliani,
hey, at least I didn't throw Rudy Giuliani potentially in jail.
Yeah, I'm still his friend.
I'm still his buddy. You're the fake friend. I'm the real friend.
If I'm Giuliani, I'm like, hey, Jenna, I appreciate you coming out to my defense with regards to people like making fun of my COVID diagnosis. Can you please quote tweet the ones that don't start off with me undoing my pants in the Borat movie?
Or farting, which I forgot about that story, but he's a man who really just doesn't seem to be able to hold himself back from his most guttural urges.
It's been only uphill from there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what do we have of him on his live stream yesterday?
But we should say, Jenna Ellis says to you then, hold on, Bradley, keep that up. We gotta do this. Imagine being such a worm that you'd actually tweet this. The left's glee over the mayor's COVID diagnosis.
Yeah, I read that.
Evil. Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. I read it. It's I really don't even have much to add to that except that it seems like their friendship has broken up here. But Rudy Giuliani's been live streaming through it all. This was him, I guess, yesterday. And I don't know what he puts in his mouth here. I'm not going to speculate, but he does make a comment about how it makes him feel.
My friends, you'll be able to get out of the golf cart, and you'll be able to hit further than Trump. Uh-oh, we just got a call. Is that Trump? He's disputing that you'd be able to hit the ball further than him. Andrew hits the ball further than him. Andrew hits the ball further than him. I don't. Andrew hits the ball further. Now, this he does very shrewdly.
Something. I don't really tend to take meds on the live stream, but that's
it's against the TOS.
a little bit.
He's also whispering that his son Andrew, failed gubernatorial candidate in New York, does actually drive the golf ball longer than Trump, but is shrewd about it, so he doesn't make it known.
Rudy better be careful because first Jenna's gonna turn on him, and then if he makes any more disparaging remarks about Trump's golf game,
that's game over.
Game over, baby. I mean, Andrew's gonna have to go into witness protection because he hit the golf ball harder than Trump.
It's like, you know what? Those legal fees, Rudy, that event at Mar-a-Lago, canceled.
Yeah, canceled. Sorry.
That wire transfer, I don't know where it went.
I like how you give him like an almost like a
Dr.
a little bit of a Dr. Evil accent there. But anyway, walls are closing in. Very interesting here. And as a reminder, this is the case where Trump cannot pardon himself. It is a Georgia case. It also is one of the few states that has removed pardon powers from the governor. So even if a MAGA governor comes into office, the governor would be unable to pardon Trump in this way, at least without changing things statutorily, and that would be quite difficult. So we'll continue to monitor this, but now at least 4 people pleading guilty, flipping on Donald Trump, and including 3 of his lawyers. And the testimony will certainly be explosive.
It's funny watching Giuliani. He has a YouTube page with about 500,000 subs, and he gets like 6,000 views.
Hey, I mean, he's got a. It's almost like a
diary. Left reckoning.
His hands shake too much for him to write in a diary, so he's gotta do his live stream. I'm sorry for making fun of that. Am I a little warm? I guess.
There's a. Oh, okay, you're gonna.
No, you go.
I was just gonna say there's one time where Rudy was live streaming and then forgot the stream on live and was just in his office, and there was this moment where it's like, is Rudy going to do something when he doesn't know the camera's off? God. And they just ordered food, unfortunately.
Oh.
People thought he's gonna like.
That could happen again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But my pants.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's happened pizza? On camera before.
We got pizza?
Yeah. The only reason that we didn't see more of it was because like the Borat producers said we have to protect our actress.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gonna also highlight this here. Over the weekend, the Los Angeles Times published a piece entitled "Killings in the U.S. Are Dropping at a Historic Rate. Will anyone notice?" Well, we've noticed. Local news, right-wing outlets.
Oh, the Floyd effect is wearing off.
Yeah. Right? They addressed that in this. I mean, like all of these people who have decided that it's lucrative for them to really lean into the crime thing, whether they make it their entire YouTube channel, like that guy who was the sidekick at the Tim Pool debate that I did, or
the actual justice warrior.
Okay, yes, sorry, actual justice warrior. Whether they'll acknowledge that, I mean, this article here, killings in the U.S. are dropping at a historical rate. Will anyone know this? This should blow a hole in the entire premise of like the past 12, 16 months that some of these people have branded themselves on. But will they even report on this story? Probably not. It's a great piece. I'm going to read parts of it to you. Homicides in the U.S. dropped significantly in 2022 and have plummeted even faster this year, putting the country on track for one of the biggest declines in killing ever recorded. Crime statistics show. Crime did rise.
Sorry, I'll let you continue with it before I make my observation about what might lead to something like that. Maybe a huge spike right before it.
Here we go. Crime did rise nationwide in 2020 and 2021. The disruption caused by a deadly pandemic, which I think, affected people's brains a little bit, and we're still dealing with some of that fallout. There will be books written about what COVID did to a lot of, you can even draw a line to like Putin's isolation on his yacht and what's happening in Ukraine based on the pandemic. But putting that aside for now. The disruption caused by a deadly pandemic, a record increase in the availability of guns, a pullback of policing in some cities, and perhaps other factors contributed to combined to create a surge in homicides and other crimes. That national tide has started to recede, but public perception has not kept pace. Let's start with the numbers. The FBI's annual report on the nation's crime statistics shows a 6% decline in homicides in 2022. The drop exceeded what most crime experts expected, said Jeff Asher, a crime data analyst and consultant whose Datalytics site is a widely cited source of information. The FBI data, which the Bureau compiled from reports filed by 18,888 local police departments, lags nearly a year behind reality. Asher, who puts together data from departments that cover a large majority of the nation's population, says that so far this year, homicides nationwide have declined 11% to 12%. Cities tend to report first and have larger drops in more rural areas, Asher noted. So he's projecting the final nationwide 2023 numbers will show a similar drop somewhere between 7 and 10%. A 10% decline would be the largest ever recorded, he said. The largest ever recorded. But we're in the midst of a crime wave in this country, if you watch half of the news channels in this country. The decline goes beyond homicides. Violent crime overall ticked down in 2022 across the country, the FBI numbers showed, returning the U.S. pretty much to the levels of 2019 before the COVID-19 era increase. That's consistent with the pattern of the last dozen years. Despite some fluctuations, violent crime nationwide has stayed largely at the same level since 2011, when it hit a plateau after 20 years of steady declines. That doesn't mean all categories of crime have declined. Auto thefts, for example, have soared in many parts of the country, in part because of a wave of social media videos publicizing easy ways to steal Kia and Hyundai cars. But the concept of violent crime, this is a quote from that guy Asher, the concept of a violent crime wave, it just really doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, and to the extent there's like a Floyd effect, for instance, like in people's minds, something has changed and it's leading to different experiences with regards to crime. It is in the minds of our police force. And I think they have been throwing a tantrum, basically, not even pre-George Floyd, since the entire like BLM movement has emerged. I think when you hear about like certain people being harassed and like there's no cops and even showing like sort of dangerous behavior and cops don't show up, it's not because the budgets have been trimmed, it's because the cops are like, fine, we get to decide when we get to that, and we're gonna let that be a problem for a little bit longer because our feelings are hurt because we're not allowed to kill with as much impunity with slightly less impunity than we were allowed to kill with before.
Well, to those cops, I will say facts don't care about your feelings. The crime narrative relies on anecdotes, and this piece continues to flesh that point out. The power of the anecdote explains much of it. In contrast to, in a country of nearly 340 million people, some crime takes place every hour, every day. Those incidents stick in people's minds, especially when the details are grisly. Vivid stories have far more power than dry numbers to shape how people view their world. And in the social media era, crimes anywhere can be just a click away. Anecdotes have even greater impact when they're fresh and crime statistics are not. Unlike economic statistics, which arrive monthly in real time, the U.S. system for reporting crime data, first set up in the 1930s, remains antiquated and slow. By the time the government reports the data, it's often too old to inform national debates. The localized nature of most crime plays a role too. In any year, whatever the national trend, some city probably will have an uptick in crime, often without a clear cause. They give some examples there. But that is undoubtedly true. We get the data on crime for the previous year, and it takes months and months for us to get that full picture. And when it does happen, honestly, people compartmentalize it because their brains have moved on to the next scary thing that they see on local news. So the reality is that violent crime in general, has been on a steady decline for decades at this point. There has been a bit of a plateau in recent years, as has mentioned, but the spike in 2020 and 2021, there are obvious causes for that. And they all lead back, really, to the pandemic and the fear and the anxiety and the economic desperation that mass disruption caused. And it's not about liberal attorneys general. It's not about district attorneys and law enforcement being too scared to do their jobs. No, this is an immensely explainable phenomenon based on the intense circumstances that we all went through in the middle of COVID, and poor communities felt way more acutely, where there was death all over the place, and there were people who were essentially sociopathic saying, get back to work, get back to work, get back to work, and we're going to provide you with the most threadbare assistance possible.
And that's if you're in the formal economy.
Exactly.
Which is, guess what? If you're wealthier and have a higher income, there's more likely that you're in that formal economy as opposed to poorer people who... I mean, I can't get over, like, when the first week those checks were going out, some guy I heard outside my window just on the street talking about, like, I'm not signed up for any of that. I'm not going to see it.
Yeah. If you're not in the formal economy, you're gonna go to crime.
What else are you going to do?
Many
to pay
people.
Rent?
Right, exactly. It's so simple to understand, but
we need to make the essentials decommodified. So, like, yeah, people aren't forced into this choice, which we want to force into this choice because it's good for the people selling the commodities.
Exactly. And then there are rubes in the media who have decided to cave to the pathologizing of entire groups of people, often poor, in order to make some case, I'm not exactly sure what it is, that liberals are wrong or that we're soft or leftists are unrealistic or bad on elections. I mean, who the hell knows? But at least from what our job is here, it's to educate people about the realities. And I will read that headline once again. Killings in the U.S. are dropping at a historic rate. Will anyone notice? Hopefully you guys do at this point. Let's check in now on what's happening with the speaker race before we head into the fun half. Bradley, do we have an update right now on what is going on with the internal vote in the Republican caucus?
So 45 minutes ago, a roll call vote in the room was about to begin at Tom Emmer's request after he became the nominee, receiving a majority, but with less votes than Jim Jordan did in conference. And more than 20 House Republicans voted against Emmer in the roll call after he became nominee. And just a few minutes ago, Representative Dave Joyce of Ohio walked out with a copy or some material related to a resolution to elevate Patrick McHenry from his Speaker pro tem position to interim Speaker.
Which means that the Emmer prospects are likely even dimmer than anything that would coalesce around Jim Jordan, which is fascinating because, you know, Emmer is not as offensive to the average voter as Jim Jordan. Emmer voted for the Respect for Marriage Act, the federal recognition of same-sex and interracial marriage that passed a year or two ago, and Biden signed it. You have Representative Rick Allen from Georgia walking out, speaking to Manu Raju of CNN and saying that he won't vote for Emmer because he doesn't hate gay people and interracial marriages. And that means that it's not, you know, the dissension, the chaos. It's coming from every angle. It's not just Matt Gaetz. Like, Kevin McCarthy keeps going on television and blaming the Democrats and Matt Gaetz. The Democrats and Matt Gaetz. No. This is the problem of the structure of the Republican Party. They're a bunch of nut jobs, and everybody is trying to make their own case and appeal to different constituencies. But it all really does funnel down and back, I should say, to one guy, Donald Trump. And we have this clip of him at a rally last night speaking about Emmer for House Speaker. Emmer is the whip. So after Scalise, he's the third in line, you know, or was the third in line before, I guess still technically, he's still the third in line, even with McCarthy out. They're just going down the list of Republican leaders and nobody seems to be able to agree on anybody. And part of the issue is that Trump won't endorse Emmer. He endorsed Jim Jordan. Now Emmer's getting fewer votes in the first round of voting in the internal voting with Republicans than Jordan did. And so many of these Republicans are looking at what Trump had to say yesterday in New Hampshire, and they're making their decision based on that. Not 49ers Vikings. No football highlights.
Emmer for Speaker. He hasn't historically been your biggest fan, but he is the most likely candidate right now.
Well, I think he's my biggest fan now because he told me yesterday and he told me I'm your biggest fan. So I don't know about that. Well, we're looking at a lot of people and, you know, sort of trying to stay out of that as much as possible. But they'll get it straightened out. But no, I've always gotten along with him and I get along with all of them, really. A lot of good people. We have a lot of great people.
So that is not an endorsement. That's certainly not. He said there, if you couldn't hear, he's my biggest fan now because he called me yesterday and told me he's my biggest fan. So I'm trying to stay out of it as much as possible. That's a non-endorsement. He is trying to humiliate him by saying he came and begged for me. He begged for my endorsement. Not going to get it. So another waste of time in this process. I have no idea where this goes. I want to be at the end of it so then I can comment on the actual realities of what we're seeing. Are you joking? Bradley just pulled this up. Tom Emmer retweeted this video and pretended it was an endorsement. Thank you, Mr. President. If my colleagues elect me Speaker of the House, I look forward to continuing our strong working relationship.
The video is literally him being like, he's a cowardly ass kisser.
Yes.
And staying out of it. And Tom was like, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Can I add some tongue to that ass kiss?
Yeah, sorry, let me just powder my nose for a second.
Yeah.
But Jake Sherman over at, and just to be clear about Dave Joyce was that Ohio Republican was talking about the pro tem resolution. He didn't have it with him, so I don't know if that means he's going to the floor with anything or not. But Jake Sherman over at Punchbowl News just 2 minutes ago tweeted, It's official. Roll call for Emmer is over. Roll call vote is over. 26 House Republicans said they would vote for someone else besides Tom Emmer for Speaker on the floor. A gigantic pool of no's.
Yeah, and then he doesn't have the leverage point that Jordan was banking on, which is like, you want to say this crap in private? Well, make your vote, go in public and say you're voting against the Trump endorsed guy. So that number would grow on the floor if they bring it to the floor.
It's 26 behind closed doors. They're probably, yeah, they're keeping their powder dry probably in terms of who they're.
I mean, they have to be. We also saw, didn't Dean Phillips this morning though say that he would vote for Emmer? So I mean, that is, we don't need to pull it up. There's really nothing to say, but he is a Democrat. The one thing that could get Emmer over the hump is if Democrats defect, but you would still need many Democrats to do so.
Well, the interesting thing about Phillips with that tweet, the only reason I'll just see if I can get it, just because I think it's slightly interesting that there are many reports, obviously he's still hemming and hawing because it's going to completely ruin his reputation in Congress. He's reportedly announcing a Democratic presidential primary bid on Friday, and hoping to file for the ballot in New Hampshire hours before the deadline closes. So I'm also thinking maybe he's like, hey, what the hell? I'm going to become nuclear in 2 days or 3 days from now. Maybe I'll just chart my own course about saying I'll abstain if Emmer gets the vote, as opposed to voting for Jeffries.
Oh, yeah. He said he'll abstain, right, to clear the path and give one more pathway forward in terms of vote threshold. He says the dysfunction. Oh, so he's running as the unity candidate against Joe Biden, who ran as the unity candidate. The dysfunction in the House is a national and global security issue. I will sit out the speaker vote if Tom Emmer will fund our government at negotiated levels, bring Ukraine and Israel aid bills back to the floor, and commit to rules changes to make Congress work for the people.
Which is basically what Hakeem Jeffries is saying in terms of the negotiating points, but he is not instructing anybody explicitly to vote present or to not vote.
He's not, but this guy is trying to make a name for himself in some mavericky, John McCain Democrat way. Good luck to him. It's a bold strategy, Cotton, to run as the centrist against Joe Biden, who's so divisive, I mean, Biden, he's just out there with his Antifa black outfits, just saying death to America. You've got to get Dean Phillips in there to rein him in.
Who wouldn't love this guy? The one of, if not the richest member of the House of Representatives, who spent the early years of his time in Congress barely masking his hatred for Ilhan Omar.
I mean, I'm gonna just read his Twitter bio so people, try to find a trash can if you need to throw up. Normally affable, the New York Times. Non-kooky, the Wall Street Journal. Eternal optimist, radical pragmatist, common sense enthusiast, and bipartisan believer. Oh man, you are brave. The fence sitter. Everybody says it. When you grow up and you hear the term fence sitter, you say, "Mom, what does that mean?" And she says, "It means it's the bravest person in the world who stands up to everybody at the same time."
That son is Dean Phillips.
All right. Well, Emmer's probably DOA, but we'll keep you updated on this riveting story. Anyway, Matt, what is happening on Left Reckoning?
Yeah, Left Reckoning on Sunday, we had Carl Baer on to talk about Cornel West taking Harlan Crow money, and also the bombing of the hospital in Gaza, as well as, just generally talking about conflicts and where the burden of proof is and that sort of thing. We do not have a show tonight because David has something and I want to watch basketball. It's mainly because David has something, but I'm happy to be able to watch opening night tonight. Tomorrow night, Derek Davison on to talk about if we're going to be doing a regional war, for an apartheid state that has security issues. So check that out tomorrow night, a different night this week on Wednesday.
And on ESPN yesterday, we spoke a little bit about the ALCS, which is completely out of date now, but we predicted that the Astros would win, and they did not, which is fun for humanity. But the stuff that is updated is we heaped praise on Lamar Jackson and Myles Garrett. We also heaped praise on the Eagles' offensive line and defensive line, and ripped into a few of our least favorite head coaches, Brandon Staley and Josh McDaniels, youtube.com/ESPN show, and then we'll be back on Thursday, since Bradley and I both went 0-3 with our picks this weekend. It's been rough. Yeah, not good. We will see you then. Well, this show relies on your support. Help us out. We have no idea how long Sam will be doing jury duty. It can't be as long as what Matt did. But, fund our raises. Fund our raises, since I'm hosting the show a lot now. So, this is, if you become a member and you like me a little bit, it helps us out. So, anyway, join themajorityreport.com. The number is 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half. Bye-bye.
Left is best. Jamie and I may have a disagreement.
Yeah, you can't just say whatever you want about people just because you're rich.
I have an absolute right to mock them on YouTube.
He's up there buggy whipping like he's the boss.
I am not your employer.
I'm tired of the negativity.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to upset you. You're nervous? You're a little bit upset? You're riled up?
Yeah, maybe you should rethink your defense of that, you fucking idiots.
We're just going to get rid of you.
All right.
But dude, you want to smoke this joint?
Yes.
Do you feel like you are a dinosaur?
Some good shit.
Exactly. I'm happy now.
It's a win-win.
It's a win-win-win.
Oh, hell yeah.
Now listen to me. 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 847-906-501-457. 2, 38, 56, 27. 1/2. 5 eighths. 3.9 billion.
Wow.
He's the ultimate math nerd.
Don't you see?
Why don't you get a real job instead of spewing vitriol and hatred, you left-wing Limbaugh?
Everybody's taking their dumb juice today.
Come on, Sammy.
Dance, dance, dance.